And then I'll just
Oh.
drop off. Yes.
Yeah, that's it. We just shut it off. You just end up going away. So
All right, cool.
all right. So here we go. Hey everybody. Thanks for joining us again. You know why you're here. And we're excited to talk about a subject and topic that is on a lot of people's minds. And thanks to Ryan's newsletter, we're really getting a lot of questions and activation on this topic, which I think a lot of people will find helpful. And that's really about, like, what are we going to do in the third-party cookieless world? And what we seem to sort of have a discussion around several topics or several ways to sort of meet that challenge that's coming up in 18 to 24 months. Some of that's around contextual solutions, some of that's around emails, hashes, and then also identity and several others. So today, joining us, we're real lucky. We've got Kristy Schafer from Permutive. Kristy, hello, how you doing?
Hey guys.
Yeah, and
hey.
Yeah, thanks for hanging with Ryan and myself to sort of explore this kind of mini series here. We've got a number of guests lined up who want to talk about it, but we're happy you're here to kick it off and really sort of help guide us as practitioners, right? And also to help educate anybody who's watching and listening. So let's start there. Just in terms of, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on over at Permutive and how you guys are sort of thinking about everything we just sort of mentioned.
Yeah, sure. I think so. From our viewpoint, luckily for us, our whole.
Actually, first, I'm sorry. Time out. This is our, we like saying time out. I'm sorry. Can you tell everybody who you are first? I'm sorry, because I think
Yeah.
just a quick intro and then tell us about
Sure.
Sorry about that.
I'm Kristy Schafer. I'm the VP Americas, primarily oversee sales at Permutive, but also looking at our full go-to-market team and organization in the US.
Excellent.
Yeah, so rolling on that, I think from Permutive standpoint, luckily for us, we were built in the era of privacy, and that meant that we built a solution which wasn't relying on cookies. So we've been thinking about this for a long time. Right now, we're really doubling down on understanding what on the buy side are the blockers and how they're working towards a future for interacting with publishers when it comes to operating without a cookie. And so it really brings up two interesting lenses, right? The first thing an agency says is, what can you do with my data? How will you enrich my data, my data, my data, my data?
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're, interestingly, I think the buy side, from my perspective, from what I've seen, is a little bit like 6 months ago for publishers. Publishers had to react to the decline of the cookie. It hit their revenue. They felt it. Whereas the agency side was just like, whoop, I'm just gonna shift things over here and stop buying on Safari, or buy value audiences on Safari. So I think publishers have been thinking about it for a bit longer, and in conversations with agencies, I think it's early days for some of them, not all by any means, for sure. And
that's an interesting point, because I want to pause there for a second, because I don't know how much of our audience really sort of thinks about like what occurred a couple of years ago when there was already sort of a big shift, and there was an impact, right? And so as publishers, we had to be prepared for that. But it really doesn't seem to have sort of caused the crater, you know what I mean, that everybody would have thought as budgets just sort of shifted, and so this is a different event, right, Ryan?
Yeah, it affected 30% of the browser market, not the other. I mean, but Chrome's got to have 68% of the remainder. So my question is a little more granular. What is, when buyers say, how can you enrich my data? A, most people do enrichment via third-party data, so that seems to be a difficult, how do you even approach that? But B, what is most buy-side data? Is it just like either they're like, is it sort of the same thing that publishers have when it comes to, is it, emails or GA data?
Yeah, I think so. If you think about when you take out cookies, you need to have some sort of deterministic identifier, or you should have some sort of deterministic identifier. Importantly, privacy comes into this as well, because you not only have to have this viewed from the lens of the browsers, you also need to think about regulation. And those two worlds, you need consent from the user, right? So everything that Apple's doing today is not about ad tech versus publishers, monetization, et cetera. It's all about the user and their rights to the data. And so when you think about it from that lens, I think it's an important viewpoint to keep in mind with the solutions that are built, that you can't just build a workaround. It's not actually in the best interest for publishers to recreate the third-party ecosystem by any means. And you need a deterministic identifier to enrich data, so it doesn't scale.
I was going to say, and like, it feels like they're two opposite things. You either have a deterministic identifier or you have a privacy first targeting strategy. I don't think if you want scale, you can have both. Can you?
So I think there's a path to get there. So in the short term, if you really think about on either side, you have your known users and you have your unknown users. And especially from the publisher lens, think about how much effort probably you've done at the Atlantic to build your known user base. You maybe only have 10% or less of your audience. And from the agency side, from what I've heard, I'm not speaking on behalf of agencies by any means, but what I've heard in my conversations is we want to be able to recognize our users and be deterministic about that. And then when you ask, well, do you not trust publisher data? The answer is no. The answer is we do trust publisher data, but we have a problem trusting it at scale. So I think that's where some of that solutioning has to come into play. How can publishers start to create a framework, which, there's paths in place with the IAB data labels and consistent taxonomy, but I think for it to be successful, it has to be like a crawl, walk, run. Like, let's just start basic and simplistic. Let's prove this works, and then build on top of it as time goes on in order to make that path successful.
So
also,
go ahead,
Eric.
No, you got it.
I'm also just very interested in, I'm not sure how much you've talked to Buy-Side about this, maybe a lot, maybe a little, just what are their plans? Like, I think most conversation is about like 3 years and onward from now. Like, what is the future of this? And
Yeah.
I have a lot of curiosity around the intermediate 12-ish months in which this all changes,
right?
But we don't really have anything solid that anyone's that can handle $2 billion in spend. So
right.
Like, is their plan just to shift more budget into Facebook and Google, which is like every publisher's fear? But is that the plan?
Yeah, because real quick, Kristy, because think about this, that same question, the exact same question. Well, let's just take a moment to think about where we're at about that question. It's I mean, we're in the middle, let's say in the middle of 2020, right? So
like Q 0.5.
Yeah, exactly. Right. and we're we still haven't fully rebooted from COVID, right? So we're halfway through this year. Fast forward 6 months from now, we're in the middle of Q4, right? So like, is that the right time to sort of talk and think about this kind of stuff, right? So these are open-ended questions. Then go into the beginning of next year, you're in Q1. So for some publishers, they're like, the sky's falling, but it happens every year, right? So, and then you're a year out. And then you see, as Ryan was saying, we're already a year and a half ahead from here. It seems like it's a really hard time to sort of figure out what to do with that time in between. So back to the question, what are your thoughts there?
It feels like there's no, like, so what Kristy was saying before, everyone has kind of ideas, and I think everyone's somewhat confident that there will be an answer.
Yeah.
I am less confident that there will be an answer whenever, or the only answer will be whatever this privacy sandbox is, because that's a Google thing, and then Google can feel tucked in about turning it off on Chrome and say, like, wash their hands of the whole thing.
Right.
But for the rest of the world, that may not work. So I'm just curious, like, what are buyers' contingency plans for that time?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say I have enough exposure to give you a holistic view on that. what I have heard is, yes, Facebook and Google are attractive, but for similar reasons, that's not where an agency wants to dump all their money. And what I've seen successful publishers do is start to, in this interim time that you have left, really leverage the existing third-party data to help transfer that audience to a first-party audience on your own and operated, and be really prescriptive about it using data, and help the advertiser see this is actually the same audience that you're buying from a third-party capacity exists on my site.
So what you're saying is basically, like, because we have third party now, use that to make the case that in 18 months, this will still be the same audience, even if I don't have the third party data to prove it to you in 18 months. Basically,
exactly.
Start doing that.
Yeah, and you can flight campaigns today, 50% third party, 50% first party. It's the same audience. It's just, it's overlaps, right? Overlaps in indexing to prove that it's the same audience. And you can show that it performs just as well. You can start to use your own data that you're capturing about your users. You know, every publisher's on different journeys there. But definitely, I think there's a path that people can be taking now to start working with advertisers to shift their mindset, because really buyers are going to wait till the last hour. They're going to, until they have to.
It's not just buyers. I mean, we all do it. It's
Yeah,
all guilty
exactly.
of it. Well, yeah.
Only if you live dangerously, Ryan, you do.
I feel like it's the only way we know how. So one last thing, you just made me think of something, and I might have to write it later, but like, it makes me think that like third-party data enrichment will still be a thing after this, but it'll be panel-based once again. Like, we're going to go to a weird internet-based GRP model. It feels like, is that how this sort of works at first, because to your point, to prove that I'm indexing, I index X% on business decision makers.
Right.
So I can't target all of them, but I can tell you that I index 60% higher than, site B. Is that in the interim where we're going, or maybe even, is that a 5-year plan?
There's so many different paths right now. I think there's the path of those who have it, which have a subscriber base or who poll and survey their users. They have a set of first-party data which can then be modeled against the rest of their audience, which is the same way that third-party data works today. You take a seed audience, you model against it. Only third-party data has been modeled against like 10 or 20 times. So it's like you're a grandma, Ryan, and also
I've seen our site break down on 4 very reputable third-party data vendors, and you would think they were 4 different sites. But surveying my users for their, I don't know, household income or college graduate level, or feels like a way to get bad data.
Yeah,
it feels like an unverified, and depending on, this is anyone who knows how to manipulate a survey based on questions and order of answers and all of that can sort of massage the data and get whatever they want.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what we run risk of?
I think from that perspective, there's a little bit of a infancy status there in terms of knowing what to expect. What we have seen with publishers that do this is when you force the response, people are like, click, 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 get me out of here. But when it's optional, you get a little bit higher quality.
What's interesting is, and we've talked about this first, there's a word that keeps coming up because I think we're really going to go into this moment, and Ryan mentioned, and it's weird, right? We're going to go through this like weird period, and the more and more we talk with folks, it's inevitable. It's bound to happen. When we get to that period, I can't wait to have conversations about how did we get to this point, but along the way, we're talking about the publishers and that have the ability to execute, almost creating this practice, almost a data practice. That's really reserved for a handful of publishers on the web. So
I knew you were going to bring this up. I have other questions, and of course,
so something to think about. We can come back to this, but I think it's a bigger question, and I don't know if we'll always, find an answer to that, but it's something that comes up again, right? There's the privileged web, and then there's just the rest of the web that, is very real too, right? So let's table that for a second. But I know you had a good question. You were
No,
gonna
this is good. No, actually, I was just going to pivot us into, because I've asked a lot about the buyer side, but like just recommendations on pub side. Like, hey, aside from IAB tagging, like it feels like as of right now, all of the plans for this are set up to have a DSP or an agency just absolutely lose their mind by dealing with 10,000 different publisher naming conventions or taxonomies on these interest buckets or like whatever you want to call it. So let's say I want to be future-proofing myself now. Like I want to do this right. I want to get myself like, what are my best practices? How do I get myself in a place where let's say I lay all the groundwork and I actually like have a very good naming, all of this, but let's say like MRC or someone comes out and says, actually, this is the way you need to do it from here on out. Or like, the trade desk brute forces everyone into doing it. And now I have to change everything. So how do I future-proof myself against having to do like 100% of the work 2 times?
Yeah. I think, not too different from today, where you win as a publisher is your own unique audience narrative. So if you're today selling on third-party data, you're not that differentiated. I can go find that audience on the Atlantic. I can find it on CNN, Wall Street Journal, et cetera, which is problematic, and it reduces your CPMs. So your best strategy is to really look holistically at your data and what you know about your users, and really think about how can you collect information that's ties into where the advertisers are buying. So they go to Google because they know intent. They go to Amazon because they have purchase data. Really thinking from that perspective, how can I start to identify data sets that are unique to me as a publisher that are valuable on the buy side?
But sort of in two sides to this. Again, doesn't that just, unless the advertiser is specifically looking for, it's really going to be a handful of publishers. And like the Atlantic's not even one of them. Eric considers us part of the privileged web, but like not a lot of people are looking for scale on an Atlantic audience, but they might be looking for a CNN, or they might be looking for a very large publisher, or like a Hearst or a Meredith across a bunch of brands. So it feels like that strategy doesn't scale, and then requires a privileged web of like sales reps and stuff like that to be out there pushing these things. But so like, how do I come up with a version of this that scales?
Yeah. So I think there's some really useful tools that can be leveraged, whether it's, so one that on the Permutive side, we have seen a lot of value integrating with is with IBM Watson. So that helps you identify more keywords or organically without having to do a ton of back-end work. It applies natural language processing, which is super valuable right now, especially when you look at COVID and trying to differentiate, is this a negative COVID article or sentiment that's okay, happy, et cetera, to help you just get the advertisers off the ledge to buy against COVID, which I know is an uphill battle, but I think there are tools out there that make this process easier and scale really well, whether you're a small guy or big guy, and can help create some consistency as well. And like I said earlier, from a taxonomy standpoint, I do think for there to be the ability to buy contextually or behaviorally at scale, it will have to start very, very small, prove that it works, and then just continually build on it in an agreed way with either IAB data labels or whatever the case is, but something that allows the buyers to know that a pizza enthusiast on BuzzFeed is the same pizza enthusiast on Vox, and not that on BuzzFeed it was one view of a pizza content, and on Vox it was like 5 views and clicked on a Pizza Hut ad or something, something like that.
Right. Well, yeah, that's what.
Let me ask about your question, because I think there's another part of it too. Like for any kind of publisher, what about the cost? This is a new cost, I'm assuming, all right? So this doesn't happen for free, or does it? Or, whose responsibility is it, right? So how does that sort of play out when, that's going to affect everyone? Any thoughts on that?
I think, ultimately, as the publisher, right, it's in your best interest to build a data strategy and really understand your audience. So I think uniquely you would have to absorb that cost in order to have a solution that works at scale. But TBD, I don't know, Ryan, what are your thoughts?
I don't do this often. I'm actually going to defend the vendor. I think in this, like, not necessarily does it have to be a DMP or any, like, but if you're trying to future-proof yourself as a site, whether you're a 4-person operation or 600-person operation, like, there has to be some amount of data investment.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's going to be different for every site. But I think if you only view them as a cost bucket and not a investment to prevent further erosion, then you're probably a CFO or someone in accounting. It's very easy if you get, like, too myopic just looking at a P&L sheet to say, like, oh, why the hell am I paying X $1,000 a month? But
think about it like this.
I feel like on a RevOps side,
publishers also done that with other products though too, right? So I think it's a fair question. Definitely makes sense, investment, but publishers have taken on other things too, and it didn't sort of deliver. This is different, right? We're talking about a seismic shift, right?
I'm not necessarily defending the DMP, which, by the way, Kristy, you can't tell, but I'm pointing to you. I just realized that all of our boxes are different, so it could look like I'm pointing at Eric. But it doesn't, like, I think as a publisher, you have to figure out what your data like. Maybe it's a core just investment in GA, like getting that stuff down so you understand your users and what they're doing and what their flow is. I know a lot of the smaller sites probably are already doing that because they're probably paying a lot of attention to what they're getting from Google and, like, the SEO and a lot, SEM stuff. But then, okay, let's say you've over-indexed on that. Next is some version of maybe it's paid. Maybe I know it's an overfished well, but, like, maybe it's, making sure that you're just getting the low-hanging fruit from Facebook and that audience. Or maybe it's saying, like, hey, we actually have a lot, like, we are a verticalized publisher. We have some stuff here that shows either intent or, people that are really enthusiastic about X.
Yeah.
Why don't I just, like, get one person to reach out to either agencies or brands of X?
Yeah.
How many or what sort of roles, Kristy, do you think are most effective with internally with publishers to be able to help sort of lead this charge? Like in Ryan's newsletter earlier, it was just so refreshingly honest to hear that some of the best publishers in the world don't even know that this needs to be a priority, or quite frankly don't have time to sort of think about it, but they know they have to. So what whose responsibility is it, and, like, what are the parties? It may not just be one internally that can sort of bring this together.
Yeah, I definitely think it scales and changes based off your size and resources. You can be really effective with a very small team, and you just keep it within your box. But as you go up in resources, obviously you can start to hire someone for research and insights, and they own being able to be prescriptive about your audience narrative and your account management team, and really helping to democratize the data, I think, is really important. That you have a platform that people understand how to read the actual data and what it means without having to have, like, a PhD in that platform. So it can scale. And it can also span to other teams as well, right? If you have a data infrastructure that you've built, that helps your subscription team, it helps your revenue diversification team, e-com, et cetera. So I think there's a number of different roles that can be identified at the top level and then can be kind of siloed down. I do think the best way you leverage that data is through audience narrative with your top clients. And when you build that relationship and you start to give them more insight than they can get anywhere else, it's when they start leaning into, okay, I see your data is helping me, and I see your data is giving me information that I didn't recognize that I can use in other campaigns. And that helps shift the overall process.
Cool.
Okay, before we wrap, I'm going to just put you on the spot for one last question.
Yes, let's do it. It's hot in this room, so it's going to help me sweat more. Go for it.
There you go. It's pretty basic. Okay, what's something publishers aren't worried about now but should be? You talk to a lot of them, or you have people on your team that talk to a lot of publishers, and you talk to buy side. So like there might be things that they're worrying about that publishers just aren't even thinking about, and you're like, damn, you should. Like you're caring about this, but actually it's over here that you're going to get screwed.
Yeah, man, there's a lot of those things right now, sadly. I'll give you a couple answers. One is, I think most publishers know this, but open marketplace revenue, if you're heavily reliant on it, you're at risk right now because that third-party cookie is driving your CPMs in Chrome. And if you look at your Safari CPMs, which are probably about half that of Chrome, as soon as the lights go out on the cookie on Chrome, those CPMs are going to fall. And that can be multi-million dollars for some publishers. And that's a bit scary if you're not being proactive and offensive about how you solve that problem. And then I think second is just, publishers as a whole, I think, have to really stand up right now and figure out together what stance are they going to take. Because if you have half who are buying into certain identity solutions, which are recreating or trying to recreate the third-party ecosystem or commoditizing your publisher data, that hurts overall. And if you don't take advantage of the turn of tides right now, it's a bit of a missed opportunity.
Great. Well, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Super excited that you spent some time with us.
Yeah.
And
No, this was super informative. Thank you.
absolutely. And as the topic continues, we may ask you to come back and hang out with us again and do some updates. It's like we said, it's the middle of the year and things change quite a bit in just 90 and 120 days. So we'd love to have you back on, and thanks for hanging out with us, Kristy.
Yeah,
Kristy,
awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.